I'm quoting you again, there's a very important question we always need to come back to. When do we go from the wisdom of crowds to the madness of crowds?
Yes. Well, it's, in the conceit in a democracy or even a, constitutional republic like the United States, is somewhat majoritarian. That, the majority is more right than wrong. If the 51% is more right than the 49%, and it's the way you make certain decisions. And maybe if you get to larger majorities, it's more correct. So maybe a 70-30 vote is a really good democratic outcome. It's an overwhelming win. But then, if you're at 99.9% in an election, you're in North Korea, and you suspect something has, it's not that you've arrived at the absolute truth, but that you're in an absolutely insane totalitarian place. So there is sort of this question about where one goes from one to the other. I think there's probably a sort of a, if you sort of think of the West as having two philosophical traditions, sort of the Greco-Roman classical and the Judeo-Christian. The Greco-Roman rationalist Enlightenment tradition is somehow that there's some sort of community of wise people, the Royal Society of Science in the 17th century, and that is somehow conducive to truth, and I think the Judeo-Christian one is always extremely skeptical. For a biblical scholar, I would sort of ask the question: is there a single incidence in which the unanimity of the crowd is right? I think it's always wrong. It's Joseph is right, his brothers are wrong. The Tower of Babel, everybody, it's the global crowd, it's completely wrong. Christ is abandoned.
Pilate begs the crowd to choose Christ to be freed, and the crowd
always gets it wrong.
Right.
So somehow, reason tells us to believe in the wisdom of crowds. Revelation tells us to be skeptical. And so it's a question: where does one end and the other begin?
All right, I'm going to quote you one more time on the present moment. It may be hard to define where that line is, the line you've just been describing, but I want to suggest that in all kinds of contexts, we're too far on one side, on the side that you can describe as collectivist, centralized, conformist, and just simply incorrect.
Yes.
In our politics, in what? Give us several of those contexts.
Well, in these comments, I went through several different examples.
I want to come to those.
But they are basically, probably the most dramatic one over the last year and a half has been the COVID politics, where we had all kinds of all kinds of things that were asserted way too dogmatically, and of course the dogmas then also took these sort of hairpin turns. It was. I think I often say science. Let's say a little bit of science. Science has to fight a two-front war against excess dogmatism and excess skepticism. You can't be too dogmatic. So 17th, 18th century science, you're fighting against some, ossified Aristotelianism or maybe the dogma of the Catholic Church. But you also can't be too skeptical. If you say, I don't believe you're sitting in the chair, then we can't do science.
Right.
So Humean skepticism gets to be a little bit unscientific too, and you have to somehow fight against both. But of course, science always thinks of itself as more fighting against dogmatism, and the scientists still think that they're in 1750 and they're these sort of deist, free-thinking rationalists who are fighting against the system and the power. And in the sort of paradoxical mimetic inversion, they have become what they, what you have to always choose your enemies well because you will soon be like them, and they've sort of become as dogmatic as the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages, or much worse, because at least the Catholic Church was somewhat stable in its dogmas, and here we had these hairpin turns. So February of
just sticking up for the Church, the Copernican versus Aristotelian, that was never dogma, strictly speaking. I'm just sticking up for the Church. We can arm wrestle about that later. But
I'm just describing the self-understanding of the scientists.
Yes, of course. Okay. All right.
And but we had these hairpin turns. It was hyper dogmatic and also sort of postmodern in a very unstable way. So
don't wear masks. Oh no, you must wear masks.
Yes,
that kind of thing.
Obviously, February 2020. and they're probably lying about it, but it was, there's a mask shortage, so they told people not to wear masks, and then you had a hairpin turn. October 2020, Kamala Harris was telling people, I will never take a Trump vaccine, and then of course now everybody should take or needs to get vaccinated, and then I think perhaps most dramatically of all, this sort of the shift from the food market to the Wuhan lab, which hasn't fully happened, but was again this hairpin turn with by Stewart or Colbert. I always can't get those two straight, but one of them sort of allowed it to happen, and then everybody could lockstep shift.
Right. Now you mention in these remarks that we've been talking about a friend of yours, a friend of mine too, as far as that goes, Jay Bhattacharya. Could I ask you just to tell his story in brief and why you consider that significant? Let me put it this way. Here's what I take you to be doing in telling that story. I take you to be saying, even in this collectivist moment, there are individuals.
Yes.
And there are hopeful examples.
Yes. But it's also just an example of the sheer insanity, where basically he's a health policy tenured professor at Stanford, and then has always been somewhat libertarian, somewhat heterodox in health policy, and then in the last year and a half really found his voice, and I think the thing that ended up triggering people was an article he wrote where he said, I'm going to get the quote exactly right, but something like, quote, there's no high quality evidence, there are no high quality studies that prove that wearing masks is effective. And so he didn't say there was no evidence. He didn't say there were no studies. It was just no high quality studies. And then that was, of course, way too much. And then you had this crazed reaction on campus where there was a petition to get the university to
slap him down,
to not let him talk, and not create all these health risks by being able to expound these incorrect ideas. And I think sort of my and
that really, your point, that really is insanity, because in a sane moment, he said nothing that was not unreasonable, unscientific. His demeanor is always perfectly rational. Correct?
No, it's in some sense a very technical, abstruse point. It's not
right. This is not a clash of ideologies.
It's not a crazed anti-mask thing. It's just no high quality study, and it was but of course it was the very nuanced nature of it that made it so dangerous, because we're supposed to think in very clean, ideological, bright line terms, and
subtlety is not allowed.
I have this shortcut suspicion that things, we always need more surface area for debate, but if you're not allowed to say something, I have a suspicion not only that you should be allowed to say it, but that it's simply true.